Welcome back to Learning with Merit. Today we're going to do a quick little tutorial for you more advanced Python beginners. We're going to learn about Pygame and creating simple little games with it. And we're really starting to get into the more object-oriented side of programming. So the first thing we need to make sure that we have Python downloaded. It's a quick Google search. For Python, you should find python.org, and you go down here to Downloads. You click on Download for Windows, hit that, and it will give you the executable you can run, and it should work. Make sure there's a little checkbox. If I run this real quick, oh, it doesn't want me to do it. Anyway, yeah, I want to delete that. There's a checkbox that says add Python to the path, and it usually pops up right at the beginning. Go ahead and do that. That's my suggestion. It'll just save you some pain later on. The next thing we need, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code. Here's the website if you'd like to use it. But pretty much anything that will run Python, you're going to be fine. If you have your own IDE you prefer, all the code will still work in it. It's just I prefer Visual Studio Code, and that's what I use with my students. Last thing, we're going to get Pygame. You have to have Python installed first. Don't try to install Pygame without Python. This is the page that you will find. You can just search up Pygame on Google. Go to Getting Started up here at the top, and there is a little command that you can run in PowerShell if you're on Windows. And there's more information if you're on Linux, but I imagine if you're on Linux, you can figure out what's going on down here. So down here in my search bar, I'm going to look for Windows PowerShell just so that I can show you very quickly. I already have Pygame installed, but if you type out Python, and Python 3 will be necessary in some cases, but Python works for me, so if Python 3 doesn't work for you, try just Python. -m pip install -u Pygame -user. You do that, you hit enter, and it will install Pygame for you, and then you can run this little examples here. What this means is basically using the pip package manager to install Pygame just for your user. So it's not going to install it for everybody on the system. So I want to go ahead and show you the brief tutorial here, or brief little example. So you got python-m pygame.examples.aliens. And if I run that, you get this cute little alien game where you can shoot your little rocket and try to defeat the aliens, basically. And then if you get hit, the game's over. You can click X up here, like that. So that shows us that Pygame is actually installed and running, and we can get ready to code. So we don't need PowerShell anymore. We don't need this anymore. We may come back to it in just a minute, but we don't need it at the moment. I'm going to go ahead and open Visual Studio Code. So if you have it downloaded, you can search in the search bar over here on Windows. Open that up. You get something that looks like this. Mine's zoomed in, so it's easier for you to see. And I have an extension called Code Runner on here, so that's why I have this little play button over here. So I'm going to go to File, New Text File, select a language, and then type in Python. Now we're going to name this. We're going to go to File. We're going to go to Save As. I'm going to go to my desktop just for now, and I'm going to call this get_rect .py. Now that may be funny to some of you. It's kind of funny to me, but basically we're going to make a rectangle that we can move around the screen. And this is just very basic, not a fully fledged game, so that we can understand the basic principles of Pygame. So I'm going to save that so that we now have our game ready to go. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do, we need to import some packages. So we're going to say import Pygame. Now we have a package called Pygame, and then we're going to import a module called sys. Now Pygame is, think of it like this: modules and or packages, they're files that contain other classes, methods, objects variables, those types of things that you want to use in your file. You can actually make your own modules that you can do this with. Okay, and basically you just create a Py file with the information in it, and then you can import that into another file. So that's what we're doing here. Then we also have something where we're going to say from pygame.locals, we're going to import star. And what this does is it's going to import everything from the Pygame package, module locals, everything that's in that is going to import here. And it makes it a little easier for us here we won't have to type this out every time. It actually shortens a few things for us, so that's why we're importing it that way. The next thing we need to do is we actually have to initialize the Pygame engine. All right, so if you don't have the engine running, basically you're going to have trouble getting your games to run. So that's the first thing. It should always be at the top under your imports. Ready to go. All right, the next thing we actually need a window. We need like a little GUI interface for people to interact with and watch. So we're going to have to create a window. So I'm going to say game window here. I'm going to give it two variables. We're going to have width. I'm going to set that equal to 800 pixels, defaults to pixels, and height. Also 800. I'm going to make a nice little square box here. Now there's another way to do this, and I've seen it in some other Pygame tutorials, but I'm not going to show it to you here because I think it's a little confusing for beginners. I think this is much simpler. So if you're interested in that, there are some other tutorials that will show you sort of how to declare those at the same time, but I think it's confusing for people who are still beginners. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to define the window here. So everything in Pygame is a surface, and you draw to the surfaces. So I'm going to say windows underscore surface using snake case that Python likes. Then I'm going to say Pygame. So we're going to call the module here. Another module called display, and then set mode, which is a function, or technically a method because it's associated with these modules and classes and things. So we have a function called set mode, and this one takes a tuple. And a tuple is basically a list that you cannot change. We call that immutable. So it's an immutable list. And in this case, I'm going to give it width, comma, height, just like that. And this will create our window for us. Now, it only create it for us briefly, and then it will disappear if we don't have some other pieces. So if I was to save this real quick and then run it, it pops up and goes away right immediately. So it showed up for a second, and then it was done. Okay? And basically, the reason it does that is because it runs, it creates its window surface, and then it's done, goes away. Okay? The program is ended. You need the program to keep running. So we're going to have to create something that allows the program to keep running. Now, the other thing that we need is we need some colors, because we might want to add different colors to our background of our window, or we might want to add a picture later, and we'll work on that. So we're going to create some colors, and I'm going to add them up here above the game window because we may use colors in other aspects of our game. So I'm going to say colors. I'm going to say black. And then we're going to use the Pygame package, a little color function here, color method. And it accepts an RGB value, so 0, 0, 0. And this literally is red, green, blue. And it goes up all the way from 0 to 255. If you don't know about that, I encourage you to look it up. It is very, very useful. You're going to use a lot of RGB values here in Pygame. So for white is all of those colors combined at maximum levels. So it's not like when you play with crayons and you mix all the colors together and you get black. And black is actually the absence of color. And so 0, 0, 0. Or the absence of light. White light is all of the colors combined. And you may have learned this in a physical science or physics class, or maybe even in chemistry when you talk about the electromagnetic spectrum. But basically we have pixels on the screen, and they're emitting red, green, and blue light. And if you mix them together, they actually produce white light. Now that we have our color there, I want to tell the screen here to fill with a black color. Now we could do white if you want to, but I actually like filling it with a black color because I think too much white light is hard on the eyes. I'm going to say window surface dot fill. So we're going to call a function called fill and black here. So we're going to fill that window black. Some other things we can do for the game window display, and we'll do that in just a minute. So now we have a game window. It's 800 by 800 pixels. All right. And we'll actually talk about how that sets on the screen later. Now we need to create a main function. So I'm going to say define main, then semicolon like this. In order for this program to continue running, we need a game loop. We need an infinite loop that continues running over and over and over, drawing the screen, or drawing the window back on the screen. So I'm going to say while, and this is in every game you play. They have some sort of infinite game loop drawing the images to the screen very, very fast. Okay. So while true, we're going to have some game loop. At the end of our game loop, we need to pygame.display.update. So we need to update the screen. We also need to make sure that we fill the screen again. So I'm going to set that above there. I'm going to say window surface.fill black, since I'm not using an image. All right, we'll add a couple of other things. We also need a way to quit the loop. So I'm going to say for event in pygame.event.get, like that. What this does is, so Pygame package, event module, we're going to get a list of all of the events. We're going to cycle, we're going to loop through all of the events in this list that is got for us. And we're going to say if, and this is our check, we're going to say if event.type equals quit, quit, then we are going to pygame.quit and sys.quit. If you just do pygame.quit or just do sys.quit, it's been known to cause some issues. So do both of those. Effectively what this does is it quits Pygame and it quits the window. All right, quits everything. And that ensures that we don't have too many issues. It's just good practice. Now right now what this is doing is this is drawing this screen as fast as it possibly can. Okay? And it's also important that we remember that anytime we create a function, if we don't call it, the function never happens. So I'm going to say main end here just to keep track of space. We're going to have some classes down here that we create. So I'm going to give myself some space for that. And then I'm going to call my function down at the bottom. And this just helps me keep track of things, is the way I like to do it. I like to see the main function all the way at the top with everything that needs to be defined before it, and then the classes and things like that down closer to the bottom. Here's my function call. I'm going to say main in parentheses like that. No arguments because there's no parameters. And then up here, let's just go ahead and make a note and call this the game loop. So now we have a game loop that will open a window. It will continue to display the window over and over and over and over and over and over and over until a quit happens. I'm going to save this. I'm going to run it. Look at that. So now we have this nice little black screen window. It's got a Pygame icon, Pygame window, and then an exit for us. Okay. Very, very easy for us. My bad. I also forgot something. I didn't mean system.quit. I meant system.exit. There we go. So make sure you correct that typo. Get so used to typing out quit, you make that mistake. All right. So now that we have the basic window, now we need to put something on it that moves around and does some stuff. Okay, it moves around and does some stuff. The other thing we want to do is we want to control our frames per second. And you've probably heard of FPS in games. So frames per second. Now this is important because anything above 100 frames a second, human beings don't really notice the changes very well. Anything below, you know, getting towards 30, probably down lower than 24. Movies are run at about 24. Anything lower than that, you're going to start noticing choppiness. And you're literally going to see the updating of the windows on the screen. So we shoot for 60 frames a second. That's why it's such a common number for everybody to know. We shoot for 60 frames a second. So here I'm going to define FPS as pygame.time.clock. And at the end of my while loop here, in line, I'm going to say FPS. Okay. Then I'm going to say .tick. And then I'm going to say 60 for 60 frames a second. Okay. Sort of slows it down so it's not running as fast as it possibly can. But it's still running at enough that it looks like it's totally fluid. There's no choppiness. I'm going to save that. Now we need to put something on here to move. Okay, we need to put something on here to move. So I'm going to go down here to where I defined classes. And we're going to create a class. And this will work for a lot of things. We're going to create a class called player, and you could have like enemies or different names or things like that, whatever you want to call it. We're going to define its constructor here. So define init. We're going to use self to reference the object that is created of the instance of the player class. We're going to say self.rect equals pygame.rect.rect. And then what we're going to do is we're going to give it these values to create a rectangle. And basically what that's doing is it's giving a set of start and stop coordinates and then a height and width. So this is where it will originally appear on the screen. This is the height or width and height of the block that we're creating. So we're creating a rectangle for each of the objects in the player class. Then we're going to say self.rect.center. And we're going to say this is where we want it to show up on the screen, so 400, 400. And the reason I'm doing this is I want it to show up directly in the middle of the screen. And we haven't talked about this yet. So this is 800 by 800 pixels. If we take this screen right here and we said for some reason it was 800 by 800 pixels, this point all the way over here would be 800, 800. So 800 in the X, 800 in the Y, if you remember your coordinate planes from your math classes. Okay? This would be all the way 800 in the X and 0 in the Y, this corner. This corner would be 800 in the Y and 0 in the X. And then this corner would be 0 and 0 in both. So directly in the middle, if this was 800 by 800, directly in the middle would be 400 in the X and 400 in the Y direction. All right, so it's just a big coordinate plane. So literally what I'm saying is put this rectangle, whenever it spawns, right in the middle of the screen. All right, now what we need to do is we're going to create a function for this class. And this one's going to be probably our biggest piece of code here. So we're going to say the function, or the method in this case, move, and then the parameter self. Then we're going to define a variable called key_pressed. And this is important, especially if you're a beginner. You know, naming variables and things like that, to try to describe what they're used for. It's very important because it makes your code much more readable. So we're going to say pygame.key.get_pressed. So what we're looking for is we've got pygame package, we've got module key, and then a function called getPressed. And basically, this is checking, is one of those arrow keys pressed? Okay, we're looking for one of those arrow keys. So then what we're going to say is we're going to say if, and use what we call a chained conditional statement. I'm sorry, just a conditional statement. It's a nested conditional statement is what I meant to say. Nested conditional statement. So we've got if, and then we're going to say self.rect.top. And this is going to check, so we got to give it a value here. The top of the screen is going to be 0 in the y direction. So we want to say if it's greater than the 0 direction, okay, then greater than 0, we want it to do this. And what that really means is that if the rectangle that we're about to draw is in the negatives, so you know, x is going positive when y is going positive when it's going down on the screen. So what we've got is this is 0, 0 up here in this corner. When we go down, we're in the positive y direction. All right, when we go right, we're in the positive x direction. If we were able to get above this screen up here, we would be in the negative y direction. If we were able to go further left here, we would be in the negative y direction. So we don't want to let like my mouse here, we don't want our little rectangle to go off the screen. So we've got to check for that. So as long as this is true, as long as our rectangle is greater than 0 in the y direction, we want to do this. We're going to say if key_pressed, and then k_up, like that. And then, if both of those are true, we're going to say self.rect.move_IP. And we're going to give it coordinates. Basically, we don't want it to move any in the x direction. We do want it to move up. Up is going to be subtracting from the y direction. So we're going to say -7 there. And we're basically going to do something very similar for the next few. So I'm actually going to copy this just to save myself some time. So there we paste it. In this case, we're going to say bottom. And bottom should be less than the height that we told it earlier. So it's going to be just like that. So height is 800, so this should be less than 800 in the y direction. Instead of k up, it's going to be k down in capitals. And then instead of negative in the y direction, we want to go down, so we're going to do positive in the y direction. We'll keep it going here. We got a couple more. So this time, we're going to think left. So left needs to be greater than 0 in the x direction. We're going to say k_left here. And our y value should be 0. Our x value should be -7 because we're moving to the left. So subtracting, we're going this way. Adding, we're going this way. We got one more. This time it's going to be right. All right, and right should be less than the width. Instead of k up, we've got k right. And then we should have 7, 0. Now, I picked the number 7 after testing. You can change this value, and basically this changes how fast it's going to move. I think 7 is a pretty reasonable number just for playing around with it. But you can change it to really fast, slow it way down. You could have it not move at all, I guess, if you really wanted to. But it'd be a lot of wasted code. Then we need another function here. In this particular case, we need a draw function because we're doing something fairly simple here. We're going to say self and then we need to give it a surface to draw on. So this is going to be pygame.draw.rect. And then we're going to give it the surface we want it to draw it on. In this case, it's our window. So we're going to say window surface like that. We're going to give it a color. We want it to be white. And then object self.rect here. Okay, and that's basically up here, this right here. That's the self.rect. We're getting this so it draws the rectangle correctly. All right, so that's our player class. It's very, very simple little class there. We've got to add some things to our main function and our game loop before this will work perfectly. In our main function, we actually need to create an object of the player class. So we're going to create the object player1 equals player. So this is P1 is of the player class now. And I'm going to call this setup player rectangle, like that. Then down here in our little events, we've got a couple things we need to call. So we're going to get rid of some extra space. Under Windows Surface, and order matters, okay? Because we want to fill the window surface first before we actually add these things. Then we want to player1.draw. So we're going to call that function on the window surface. And then player1.move. No parameters on that one. Then we update the display and we have our FPS tick down there. There are a few more things that we can add. In fact, there's a lot more things that we could add to make this game better and better all the time. But I think that we're ready to test and make sure that our stuff is working. I'm going to hit save here and run it. Now, this will happen quite a bit. Happens to me all the time. You're going to have like a little extra, a little extra dot or something like that. So key pressed equals Pygame. Let's go find it. Yeah, I managed to delete something unnecessarily. So it's get underscore, is it get pressed? Yeah, get pressed. Had to check that. Sometimes I think I'm wrong. All right, let's check that. Save and run it again. And look at that. We have a little rectangle here in our window, and I can use the arrow keys to move it around. And I know this is really simple, but it's actually amazing that we can do this. It's literally amazing that we can make this happen. You'll see it doesn't go off the screen. I can move it left and right and up and down, right, and all around. It's really fun. There's a few more things that we can add, but I think this is a great little introduction to Pygame. Later on, I will try to make more videos, making a little more advanced concepts, maybe building off of this idea. So I hope this helped you get introduced to Pygame and actually creating a little window with something you can move around and start getting into making the game.